somebody I first met in 2013. Although these times are unprecedented in so many ways, here and there are reminders of other times, like in this time of physical and also to a very large extent social isolation from each other these days, though it's a form of isolation that's new to me and most everyone else currently experiencing it. I remember how socially isolated I felt when I was stranded in Japan for 2 weeks back in 2013 after being denied entry to Aotearoa. After New Zealand, the plan was to go to Australia, which is ultimately what happened, except I got there from Japan instead. One of the places I'd be going was Adelaide, and here was somebody from Adelaide messaging me on some platform while I was sweltering in the summer heat in Tokyo in a new friend's basement, dreaming of winter in the southern hemisphere. So before I ever met Paula or knew anything about her, I knew her as a series of messages on a screen during a couple of weeks where I was feeling fairly stressed and uncertain. When I met Paula, it became increasingly obvious that we had a lot in common. If you look her up on the web, the first entry that comes up includes a one-sentence bio. I am a freelance historian with a particular interest in U.S. radical movements, transnational social movements, and music as a form of working-class oral history. If I were to write my own bio, it could easily be, I am a freelance musician with a particular interest in U.S. radical movements, transnational social movements, and music as a form of working-class oral history. A few years after we met, I guess it was 2016, that Paula and I began what became a collaborative effort that she has ultimately put a lot more work into than me, I'm both happy and slightly embarrassed to say, which I dubbed the Song News Network when we started it. Rather than trying to explain to you what that is by myself, I will just welcome Paula to the screen here, and we can talk about that and lots of other things. Questions and comments, welcome, whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Periscope, Twitch, or at davidrovics.com/quarantine. Paula, welcome to my little live stream here.
Hi, David, and solidarity greetings to everybody from Adelaide, Australia, otherwise known as the arse end of the world.
The ass end of the world. It is kind of like in that direction.
I'm quoting a prime minister of ours on that. That was Paul Keating.
Yeah. I mean, physically, like what happens after you get past Adelaide? It's kind of like just the ocean until you get to
ocean. Yes,
the Antarctic. Right. So it's kind of
be
where
Adelaide,
the ass would
Adelaide
go.
runs along the coast. Yeah.
But there's so much
actually
good food
right
in
near
Adelaide.
The beach. Yeah. So
yeah, near the
I
beach
can hear the ocean in the morning.
And there's so much good food in Adelaide that I wouldn't associate it with an ass. I'd more associate it with a mouth, actually. But I mean, now I'll associate it with both, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's. I noticed when I was in Texas, it's the same thing, and I think it's agricultural societies. Adelaide's a very agricultural kind of settler place rather than a sort of convict place, which Melbourne and Sydney are. And Texans are the same, and everyone's obsessed with food, so like good food. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yes, really good food. So I just, I always get, whenever I see, I have to just a little tangent here. Every time I see that one of the people watching is Al Glatkowski, I get just a little extra happy. I mean, we might only have two people looking at the show at the moment, but one of them led a mutiny on a ship full of napalm. And yeah, look that up. The eagle. Yeah. Hello to
Working
Al.
Class History have a podcast, I'm pretty sure, where they interviewed him. Yeah.
Good. Wonderful podcast. So I bet it was a good interview.
They do wonderful work.
Excellent. Yeah. So my first question is one that I would normally hesitate to ever ask anybody, because it's like the worst interview question, except in these bizarre times, it becomes suddenly relevant and of interest to people. How are you doing? How are you managing through the times of quarantine and all this?
Well, it's a very strange time for everybody, I think. In Australia, we're doing pretty well. I think mostly we've, flattened the curve. and kept our health system functioning. You know, it's a relatively functional society, and we do have, despite the neoliberalism, we do have a fairly good public health system. And so, you know, on a personal level, I'm fine in that sense. I also work in residential aged care, so you know, I still have a job, and you can't shut down an aged care facility. So, and
So you're what they would call an essential worker at the moment.
Yes, I'm an
even when it's
worker.
not, even in times of a non-pandemic, you're an essential worker in that role. Huh?
Yeah, well, I mean, our major concerns have been not transmitting it, not bringing it into the facility.
Have there been big outbreaks in the elder care facilities in Australia?
No, not in our elder care has been really good, actually. They're a not-for-profit, and they've banned visitors, and everybody who works has to take their temperature when they get on site, and they've taken it very seriously. There's been outbreaks in nursing homes in New South Wales, but in Adelaide, in the last week, we've had no new cases. So we sort of seem to have shut everything down early enough here that it hasn't become a huge issue. So that's good, you know, that's a relief to everybody living here, you know.
Yeah.
I try to minimize using public transport. I try not to go anywhere else besides work, you know, just to reduce the transmission risk and all that sort of thing. And that's very strange for me.
Very, isn't it? It's just, you're a fairly social person. You have quite a few friends. Yeah.
It's very odd, and I'm very much a face-to-face person.
Yeah.
You know, I actually find the sort of online interactions quite difficult. Yeah. I like to be in the same room with the person. I'm a hugger, and it's actually causing me psychological distress that I can't, you know, hug people and touch people, and I'm just that sort of person. But it's given me an opportunity to, my partner calls it pivot my life, I suppose, and think about all of the, you know, I've been doing all of this work on the Song News Network and my own history education work in between, you know, washing dishes in residential aged care, basically. And it's made me rethink my priorities, I suppose, in that way. And so that's been liberating in some ways. And
rethink, like, in terms of, if you're going to have all this basically socially isolated time, what are you going to do with it? So you have to rethink your priorities in terms of what do you actually do now that you have time that you didn't actually want to have on your hands.
Basically, yeah, that sums it up very neatly. Yeah.
Right.
So
and then isn't it hard to work though under those? I mean, I find anyway, if I'm socially isolated for 4 hours, I can be really productive, and then after that, I want contact with somebody before I dive into another project. Which in my case, I have children out, so there's, you know, I think they get tired of only having social contact with me, but I'm having social contact, so I can still kind of like, I'm not like in isolation or like solitary, you know, I'm sort of, you know, isolated with other people, unlike some other people's situations. But yeah, it is
absolutely.
it is, even just being with somebody you really like is very, very strange.
Yes, yeah, and that's, you know, fortunately, my partner and I have been living together a long time, and we get along very well. He's, you know, happy with my company, right? That's what he's like. But yeah, I suppose so. For me, I've been going through a lot of anxiety over work and what my responsibilities are there, and the rest of it is very abstract because I'm worried about, you know, I've got some friends in very difficult domestic situations, and then I've got a lot of friends in the United States, and there's a lot of stuff that's going on there that's very worrying, and In the UK too, you know, every Australian has a bunch of friends and family living in the UK or Europe or wherever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm finding I'm reacting to that kind of stress, and it makes me feel kind of helpless, because there isn't anything I can do about those situations, you know,
Yeah.
really at
Yeah.
all. I can do stuff for, you know, local people, and I can do stuff at work, and but you know, my friends who are stuck in other places, you know, I can't do much about that except check in on them, you know, and that's a very strange feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, and in the current situation, like all of my friends in other countries, like when Trump got elected, for example, you know, most of the people I know in other countries were saying, "Well, if you need refugee status, just let me know. We'll start working on it." You know,
Yeah.
but with the
Yeah.
borders closed, that's not even much of an option for anybody.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. You know,
I mean,
and this is
even as a joke, it's not even a good joke
yeah,
anymore. Yeah.
yeah, and you know, that's a really interesting. You know, I think we're all in a kind of holding pattern, because after this is over, the world's going to look very different. You know, and I mean, you rely on international travel to make your living, and who knows what it's going to be like at the end. You know, we've got airlines failing, like, you know, Virgin Airlines has just gone into voluntary administration. Qantas has sacked all their workers, you know, and is demanding government bailouts, you know, because that's the way they are.
It is
You know,
mind-blowing, the situation of the capitalist. I mean, we were talking about this before we actually went live together, but this idea that the capitalist ruling classes of all these countries, I mean, I assume they're able to do this. They were able to take this initiative because China paved the way and set the example and showed how you can contain a virus, and then you know, through these means. And I mean, you know, because I mean, which is surprising that China could do that too, because it's also a capitalist. I mean, you know, I, as you know, me and many friends of ours are speechless, aren't we? Like, I mean, this is like, you know, I've said this to at least several of the people I've just interviewed in the past week. So anybody who's actually watching this regularly might be shutting off the you know, turning off their computer right about now. But I just saw couple weeks ago, Reiko and I saw this Godzilla remake from 2016 called Shin Godzilla, about but it's like unlike the original Godzilla, which is basically political commentary about nuclear weapons. The 2016 Godzilla is political commentary about Fukushima, and it is so cynical, but not in a way that seems totally unrealistic. In this movie, they you know, they are. I won't give away the end for anybody that's going to watch it. But in this movie, much of the it's a Godzilla movie, right? Of course, is a monster attacking Tokyo, but much of the movie is a bunch of men in suits inside a room, you know, with no windows, talking about what are they going to do. You know, they seem so detached, so you know, removed from the world out there. But ultimately, the politicians are debating: are we going to sacrifice Tokyo? Are we going to nuke Tokyo in order to save the Japanese economy? And I won't tell you all what happens, but this is, you know, it's being considered as a serious option. And you know, and as it turns out, I'm sure similar types of things have, you know, obviously they have been considered. You know, this idea that we should just keep the economy going and let people die, until people started doing the math and realizing you're talking about, like, you know, Boris Johnson is talking about sacrificing the lives of 2 million people or something, and then people were like, oh, maybe that herd immunity is a bad idea. But I mean, anyway, it's like
yeah.
we have shut, the capitalists have shut themselves down, and now it looks like maybe they're going to act somehow. Who knows what's going to look like, but maybe they're going to muddle through and save capitalism along with a large portion of humanity, or is this going to be the end? Is this going to be when they realize that everybody on the planet needs to have access to running water, healthcare, housing? I don't know, you know, or maybe
Universal basic
chaos.
income.
You
Yeah.
know, it could be, or it
Yeah.
could be like
And that's
1848 and
and
all the castles burn.
yeah, it's a pivot point, I think. Yeah, absolutely. Because it's all over the world has shown the way in which that system is not sustainable. Yeah, you can't have a productive capitalist system without a productive, healthy working class, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they realize that's the big fallacy in neoliberalism, you know. And so this is why you know, the Australian government anyway has just flipped back to Keynesianism,
Yep.
because they know that that's the only way to keep the economy going. Is you've got to have a workforce at the end that can deal with and adapt to whatever comes up.
But in
Because
the
yeah, it
Great
will be different.
Depression, when the stock market crashed in 1929, I don't know. I mean, I'm not familiar with all the different, like what all the different countries in the world did at that point. But in the United States, I believe it is the case that they didn't actually start really dealing with the situation for like 3 years.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't until 1932, after there was basically armed uprisings happening all over the country in a
Mm-hmm.
small forms, that they started these reforms, right? But
Yeah.
this time it was like an immediate, almost like within days of shutting down. They were like, I mean, it was like they knew that they had to do this. Was that? Do you think they had? Even though it's not in living memory anymore, it's in the institutional memory that action like this was necessary, or like, or were they just
Yeah.
copying China again? I wonder. I don't know.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm
I
not
don't know.
not
That's an
yeah.
interesting question, and one of those questions that you know, we
We
could
can
probably
only
argue
wonder.
about for
Yeah,
like months.
but
Um,
as a what
yeah.
historical I mean, yeah. Don't tell me what are you thinking?
Well, you know, the start of the Great Depression. I mean, this is always the problem with historians. Where do you start?
Yeah,
Because if you look at Australian history, the depression started well in the early 20s. Yeah, and there were people, you know, and the major issue after World War One here was starvation and unemployment. You know, and uh, the working class, you know, came out of World War One here already starving because we were um, exporting all our food, you know, as usual. And there were mutinies, and then there was a huge unemployed movement in the 20s, especially here in Adelaide. And so in the 30s, you got, it's a very similar process that you got in the United States, and it was you know, government intervention in that situation and building up to the war, you know. And so yeah, I mean, there are a lot of similarities. Yeah, it's very interesting, and it's just in general, it's very you can, you know, I came across a meme recently that said, you know, we're entering the 20s with a pandemic and
yeah.
rising fascism and all of those things. Hey, we've been here before. It is in many ways it's a replication of the early 20th century,
It's
but
like a combination of
without a
1918 and
war. You know?
1933 at the same time, like plus
Yes.
maybe some other years thrown in. I mean, it's not very exact, right? But there are so many I mean, even though to the extent that the times are unprecedented, as everybody is
Yeah.
constantly saying, but still, there are precedents, not in living memory, but there are precedents that are not necessarily, you know, a copy of what's going on now, but it is
Yeah.
kind of amazing reading about 1918 and how many parallels there are with the
Yeah, with the
plague. I
Spanish
mean,
flu,
with the
definitely.
Spanish
Yeah.
flu, yeah,
Hmm.
so-called
Yes.
Spanish flu, which we're still calling the Spanish flu. Yeah,
Some people are still calling this the Chinese virus, you know.
well, that's true too. Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah,
And it's purely by accident, you know. But
yeah.
I suppose the thing about China is, you know, because the Chinese have a planned economy, they've done capitalism better than the capitalists in a way.
Well,
You know,
exactly,
that, that's
exactly,
what
right.
I think. And they
And
always have.
if I would say also, if you look at the past few hundred years of European history, one of the main reasons why Danish capitalism was more successful than many other countries, it was exactly for the same reasons. They've had planned. The government
Yes.
has been involved with Danish agriculture for like 300 years or something. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. And those countries, and I think a lot of the smaller countries have had an advantage in that sense. You know, you look at New Zealand, which has done extremely well, you know, shutting everything down and flattening the curve. And, you know, it's a small island. There's 10 million people, which is a sort of nice, comfortable size for a nation state. You know, the Czech Republic and Denmark and places like that are, you know, Cuba's got 10 million people. You know, you can coordinate a response effectively, I think. You know, the bigger your population is, the bigger your landmass is, the more complicated it gets.
Well, I don't know. China and Germany kind of are fairly populous places that have dealt with this very well, it seems.
But they because they both have interventionist governments and a planned economy to a large extent.
Yeah, right.
And you know, you can see from the Chinese response, you know, I think, you know, the Chinese government, historically speaking, has understood that its prosperity depends on its people. Yeah, and that's partly because it has the capacity to be self-sufficient and all that. And so they just, you know, they built hospitals in 10 days and they just mobilized a whole bunch of resources. You know, the Cubans can do it as well because there's not a whole bunch of money going into shareholder dividends, essentially. You know,
yeah,
you don't have
in Korea
that as part of the fixed
Germany,
cost, right?
Yeah, mobilizing lots and lots of people. Yeah, people with skills, even.
Yeah, and that's, you know, the interesting thing about that is that something that's gaining currency in Western societies now is modern monetary theory, right? Which basically goes, that's, you know, a government. This idea of a government having a surplus is, you know, you don't need a surplus as long as you've got a productive population. You know, you've got a government, you've got a country, you've got a nation. You just print more money, keep a grip on inflation, and put the money where it needs to go. And you know, it must be a big flip for neoliberal heads.
Yeah, I mean, and for anybody that believed that they believed that this austerity and you know, and tightening of the belts and all this draconian stuff that's been going on for so many decades, that any of this was necessary, and so suddenly, like, the wool is like pulled off of our eyes, and you know, the left and everybody who's been saying that this was totally unnecessary in the first place is suddenly vindicated. But you know, where that gets us, who knows? But
well, yeah, that's right. It's quite disconcerting to be vindicated.
Yeah, because like, who else is going to realize that we've been vindicated? Is I mean, will people draw the conclusion? Will people realize that not only was this all just unnecessary, you know, all this austerity and the rich getting richer, the poor getting poor, that none of this was inevitable, and all of this can be reversed when it's in the interest of the rich to do so. You know, that's
because it's been just exposed due to nothing under our control, how vulnerable that system is, how unsustainable that system is. Yeah.
And by the same token,
it was very interesting.
Like, not having a public health system is unsustainable. Like, I mean, this is the situation. And people here in the United States, people are still talking about what kind of health insurance plan do you have? You know, and they're not realizing, like, it doesn't matter. Actually, it doesn't matter. You could, okay, maybe if you're rich enough to be living on your own private island, you have your own private hospital. Okay, that's one thing. But basically, otherwise, when you're in a pandemic and a public health emergency, what matters is how many doctors per capita are there, how many ventilators per capita are there. We're talking about a society here, you know. And but you still hear people saying, like, oh well, I'm paying this for that, and I'm going to get this or that. You're not going to get any of that stuff. The hospitals are shut down. They're only operating on people with COVID-19 or about to have a baby or something. I mean, nobody else is getting any hospital appointments for anything, no matter what fancy healthcare you supposedly have. Yeah,
that's right. You know, and that's that natural kind of sense of entitlement in Western societies is really being challenged, but for people, I think. Yeah, that's right.
When they're suddenly faced with these ethical choices about whose life do you sacrifice when you run out of equipment. That's not supposed to be the choice we're faced with. Yeah, in the West.
No, but I think it's very valuable for that awareness to be brought home to people, because that's what we need to. I mean, you know, I've been getting a lot of stuff going. So let's not forget about climate change here. And the two things are connected. You know, that's the other thing. It shows you the connection between the economy and the society, because all of these coronaviruses that have come up in the past few years, you know, SARS and all the swine flu and all that sort of stuff, they all come directly out of the industrial system, the industrial food production system.
Taking
You know,
land away from nature and encroaching on nature more and getting exposed to all these new viruses.
Merging domestic and wild nature. That's where it comes from. It's directly connected to deforestation.
Yeah.
You know, we're cutting down the jungles in the Amazon, and who knows what we're releasing. But also we're bringing domestic animals closer to wild animals, and they're transmitting viruses, you know. And then you put them in those, you know, pigs. That's where swine flu came from in Mexico, was one of those huge pig factories where you just squished them all in together, and cross contaminations are way too easy. That, you know, in a way we've gotten a reprieve because it's not a virus. It's not like Ebola, you know what I mean? It doesn't kill enormous amounts of people. You know, we've got a chance to work out how we respond to these things, and we can't afford not to anymore. So, you know, I think it's making people think about it, and you know, that's part of, you know, I think that's very, as a radical and as an educator and a historian, that's very valuable, even though it's difficult at the time. You know, and it's making us all think about chains of production and, you know, travel, and the way that the world is connected up through international travel and what global shipping does. And, you know, around it, the world is so much quieter. I don't know if that's happening in the US, but because they've shut.
Yeah.
Well, there's
and it smells better.
Planetologists have said the seismic background noise has disappeared. You know, all of a sudden the Earth stopped vibrating with all this machinery.
Yeah.
And around here, you can see the birds are loving having their own airspace back. We've got so many birds, and they've just taken over.
Yeah. There's,
you know,
already some turtles are
cleaner.
doing better. The turtles are breeding on the beaches and stuff, like, more than they used to, because there's fewer people around it. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff.
You know, I got another meme a while ago that's, you know, people going, "Oh, we can't, you know, shut down world industry to deal with climate change." Mother Nature going, "Here's a virus. Practice."
Yeah, here you go. Try that.
It's practice. Look how good it is. You know?
Yeah.
California has clean air. China has clean air. You know.
And, you know, people, there's all sorts of so-called conspiracy theorists about theories about all sorts of things. But the fact is, when you look at the complexity of viruses as a natural phenomenon, it almost seems like it's like science fiction. Though, I mean, these things are amazing. And it, you know, if they weren't just like invented by the planet to deal with a problem like a human infestation, you know, throw a virus. I mean, you know, I'm not suggesting that the planet has this kind of consciousness, but viruses, to the very limited extent I have studied this stuff, is absolutely fascinating. How
well, we're all studying it now, aren't we?
Yeah, we're all becoming epidemiologists now. And
Absolutely.
how about other things that we're all studying, like solidarity and mutual aid? Is that something that, I mean, I have not heard mutual aid uttered in a sentence more often in the past few weeks than in my entire life. You know, are you seeing much evidence of that around you there?
Yeah. Well, you know, there's been. I found it interesting that in the United States, everybody just went straight to mutual aid. There was like this assumption that the government was not going to respond adequately. Right.
Immediate assumption.
And so they start, you know, and there's people in New York set up free food fridges, and everybody just started going, "What can I do?" You know, you know, I've been following the campaigns to get prisoners released, and we're doing, you know, mutual aid and direct action there, and but there's a very strong feeling here that we need to reach out to our neighbors, right? And that's unusual. Yeah.
More for physical needs or for emotional? Because like the government there is responding much more effectively in terms of
Yeah.
taking care of people, but than here, which is not surprising. That's true at
Yes.
most of the West. But is there a lot of people talking about the social isolation of the elderly
Yes.
people who are afraid to leave, and yeah.
Yes. And people are working from home and homeschooling at the same time. So the effects are what you're seeing in Australia, I think, is we've all kind of, hunkered down, and the cabin fevers that's starting, lifeline calls have gone through the roof, and um, people have started. So it's a lot of the attempts are about establishing community, and a lot of Australian musicians have been doing these performances from their kitchens and lounge rooms, and getting on every day. Jimmy Barnes has been doing covers every day, right? And his wife's been learning guitar, and they're just great. And I think that's part of that is a sense of connection. And I mean, it's hard enough in Australia because it's a big country with not many people in it. And the people I know whose whole entire lives have now just moved into their house. There's a lot of psychological effects from that,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden you're now responsible for your child's education. Wait, what?
And all of a
And
sudden, you're confronted with thinking about what does that exactly mean? Because of course, like what they're talking about on the radio here, I don't know about if it's what the conversation is like there. I'm sure it's a very different conversation in Denmark. But the conversation about like what is this? What is this homeschooling all about? Because like in Denmark and other countries, they understand that the whole point of school, especially for small children, is social interaction. So the idea of homeschool in their minds is just like contradiction in terms. I mean,
Mhm.
and then for those of us who are actually into homeschooling as a concept, we know that it requires that you make lots of group connections with other people so that the children, you foster community and interaction between other children. That's a necessary
Yes.
part of the whole thing. You're not, cloistered off in your little, hopefully not cloistered off in your little like Christian propaganda machine, teaching your kids
Yeah.
about evolution, creationism or whatever in your basement. That's not
Yeah.
homeschooling. But who knows what people are doing with this concept? It's terrifying.
And there's also been this delusion that you can just transfer the entire public education system online, and
Right.
teachers are trying to deal with that, and it's not possible.
No.
And I've read a lot of, I follow a lot of alternative education magazines and stuff like that, and I found an article that I just went, everybody, you need to read this, right? You're not replicating the school system in your house. You can't. There's no way to do that.
No.
The whole entire classroom system depends on a teacher being in the same room with all those kids and controlling the space. And you cannot control an online space in that way. Teachers have been trying to run classes on Zoom, and they've been Zoom bombed. How do you cope with that sort of disruption? In a traditional sense, you can't. And so she just went, you just need to let your kids be for a while.
Yeah. Good.
Let them do all that. And it's in another way. And for me, as a radical educator, it's a really exciting opportunity in a way, because you're now giving a whole generation of kids the experience of not being in school, not having routines, not being told what to do all the time. Not, school is a mechanism for social control. Public schools come out of the factory system. Yeah. A big part of what they're supposed to do is teach you to be able to work, to stick to a clock, to stick to a schedule, to not disrupt others, all of that sort of stuff. It's, comes out of the factory system in a sense. And so all of these kids have now got an opportunity to go, maybe I just like learning things. Because school can really kill your love of learning. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And So that's awesome. Well, your son is right at the age where, this is learning is the way human animals are. That learning is what we do. Toddlers just are little learning sponges, right? That's
Yeah,
what
but
that's what they're
it's so
doing.
stressful for the toddlers, for my toddler, and I'm sure for the others not to have other kids around, and especially
Oh,
like other slightly older kids around, and just the community of kids that exist in society normally. And
yes,
he's really
absolutely.
suffering.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the lack of
yeah,
social con.
little
They're not
thing.
supposed to just hanging out with their parents all the time. It's not.
Oh my
Yeah,
God, no, it's so boring.
mm, yeah. That's
And see,
but
this is the thing. This is something I've noticed, and this is exacerbating the problem. Kids need time away from their parents, you
that
know,
too. Yeah,
and we've developed a society where kids are much more closely monitored now than they used to be. And look, when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time without adults around. We would go down the local creek, we'd get into trouble, solve our own problems, all that sort of stuff.
yeah.
Kids don't do that anymore. My friend Karen, who I used to do that with when I was in primary school, she's got grown up kids. She never let her kids out of her sight. All right.
There's
She's like, I
the
would never do
culture.
that. Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's really exposing that. And I know a lot of adolescents who are severely depressed at the moment because they can't access their social groupings, and even the ones
Mhm.
who game online and stuff. It's not the same.
No, even for
A,
them.
a
Yeah.
lot of them are having real trouble with it, and having their parents around all the time, monitoring whether they're behaving themselves at school, and
And the parents are really often, I think, trying to create structure in the lives of their children because they are lacking structure themselves, and, that's typical projection. Yeah. But,
and I think, and that's another part of it is, and that's what this article was saying that I put up. We need to just learn to be. You need to stop thinking of yourself in terms of
mm,
being a worker or being a
mm.
parent or whatever your roles are, and just go, we're a bunch of people stuck in a house. Let's work that out as best we can.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
yeah,
And
yeah.
speaking of being stuck in the house there and working on projects, we gotta. I'm just realizing we're halfway through here. We need to talk about
Yes.
one of those projects you've been working on, the Song
Mhm.
News Network. Which one of the things is a domain name, right? I should have
Yes,
that. What is it?
we
Song
do.
News. What's the domain
Yes,
name
we
now?
have a domain name now. It's songnewsnetwork.com.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Songnewsnetwork.com. I've been there
yes,
before. I'm just look at that. Yeah.
yes. And
So
at the moment, it's redirecting
songnewsnetwork.com.
to our WordPress site. So
Right, but it
yeah,
is, it exists,
yes,
and you so other than the domain name, you've just you've completely revamped the song map, which is a little way for people to do some very unsatisfactory traveling on the internet. I mean, it
yeah.
can't replace the real thing, but
Vicarious experience is not the same
very
as real
no,
experience,
it's not the same.
but
But
vicarious is what we've got. So,
what else have you been doing on there?
um,
W
well, the song map is a reflection of what I've actually been doing is upgrading the entire back end. Right? So we've the collection itself has kind of moved into different formats over the years, and I know you initially set it all up as a Google Calendar, and that's been useful in some ways. But what I'm actually trying to do at the moment is build a proper database. So I'm largely doing data entry, lots of data entry, and I'm building tables and in spreadsheets, and some of those spreadsheets are the ones that have gone into the map, and so um, it's been a long and laborious process, but it's accelerated now because I have more time on my hands. you know, I was talking to a comrade up in New South Wales, and um, a couple of months ago, and he made a comment about me being busy, and I said, well, if I was less busy, I'd get a lot more done, and so here I am, a lot less
That's
busy
right.
than I was.
That's right. Less busy, you get more done. That's right. It's the project orientation that I was, as soon as the quarantine started, I thought, oh man, as far as like spending time alone, those of us who have a project orientation in life are going to be doing so fine, and those of us who don't are going to be just bouncing off the walls and suffering terribly. And you know,
Yes.
if you grew up going to regular school and then working a normal 9 to 5 job, the sort of project orientation is kind of beaten out of you the whole time. Like you're supposed to do something for 45 minutes, then do something else for 45 minutes. And that's just not how, I don't know, a normal brain is supposed to function, right? But
No,
yeah,
that's right.
if you can get into a
That's why
project,
they
you
have
can
to send you to school for 15 years, you know, to train you into that. You know, it's so unnatural. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the Song News Network, just for anybody watching who doesn't know anything about it, which is probably most of the you know, people out there watching this. Yeah, there's the URL.
That's our URL.
And one thing it involves is a calendar of songs that originally started out being my songs, but also now has expanded to include mostly songs that are not mine, written by all kinds of different people, alive and dead, and about historical events that took place on this date in history, and about people contributing songs that they just wrote about something that just happened. That's the part that it's harder to get more people involved with, because like if we had like 100,000 followers on Facebook, then more people would probably want to contribute their latest compositions. And as it is, they just overlook us, or don't think about it, or I'm not going out there, you know, finding it. As it's a lot of work to actually, even just to sort of share songs that other people are writing, you know, on a feed like that. You know, I was trying to do it pretty much methodically for a couple of years, and I just kind of like lost. I mean, I share my own stuff, which is enough, it's just time consuming enough. But I was,
it is.
I'm always hoping other people will start jumping on the bandwagon and contributing. If we all contributed songs that we're writing about recent events onto the same platform, it just might, you know, take off. That's the theory anyway. And,
yes. And that's, and, you know, over the years, I've found that, you know, I love the Song News Network because it's a collection of data, you know, and I'm into that. And it's all music. And for me, it's been a wonderful research project, and I've discovered so many topical songs. You know, so many musicians. There's so many people out there writing about what's going on around them, and so that, you know, I get a lot of scholarship out of it. And so, you know, but most of it is my research. That's what I found. What I do is keep track. You know, I'm on so many musicians' mailing lists. It's insane. You know,
and you're actually opening them and looking at those emails. I mean, that alone, being on how much time that must take. It's just, it's hard to.
I do have to put a lot of time into just research, and part of what I'm trying to do at the moment is make the data entry and updates easier to do, so that I have more time to do the research, which is, you know, the fun bit for me. But the pandemic, you know, pivoted my thinking on that a little bit too, because it's been for a long time now, I've believed that there's this mutual aid and sort of network kind of waiting to happen with the Song News Network. And I suppose the pandemic's made me go, all right, well, how do we do that? You know, like, and I've had to get over being perfectionist about it, because I wanted to do it all exactly right. Nobody knows what they're doing with all this stuff now. We're all just chucking it up there and seeing what happens. So, you know.
What was the word you used? What is?
Sorry.
Not to be. Did you say not to be what? Rejectionist? Did you say rejectionist? No.
No.
No, you said not to be something about it, but I missed the word. So I thought it was an interesting Yiddish phrase or something. I wasn't sure what you said, but I was just like, I don't know what I heard there.
I do, yeah. No, I don't remember what the word was.
Never mind.
I'll have a look later.
Later, I'll rewind and see what that word was.
Yeah, but and so the we've recently added a whole bunch of our contributors to the Facebook page, and there seems to be some traction on that. Making Facebook work in a way that's useful for people who are not technologically literate is a pain in the neck, but we're getting there. And I think that has a lot of potential. And I have so many friends in the music and performing arts industry, and this has devastated them. This whole thing, shutting down live music it's not just psychologically devastating, it's financially devastating. And so I wanted to sort of just find a way that Song News Network could help with that. And if that's just giving people another platform to, sell their stuff and encourage donations and get fundraisers going and all that kind of thing, then that's valuable at the moment. Yeah, just let's just keep everybody alive until we can do live music again. Real basic thing. And so we'll see what happens. Seems it's gotten a good response so far, and I think a lot of it is just me having the time to get in touch with people and explain what we do and what we're useful for. So yeah, that's been handy, and I think we'll once I get all this data entry finished, we can probably do a lot of interesting stuff.
So,
but meanwhile, the collection is there for people to look at and talk and send me songs. I'm very accessible on social media wise. I will always get back to you. Might take a little while. And I would love it if people would do some of that research work for me and send me their song. Put them up on the network or email them to me or whatever.
Yeah, and different forms. It could be a repository and a place where people can find stuff that. I mean, I just don't know of any particular place where people who are interested in music about current events and history can find whatever people are writing on that sort of in that sort of not genre, but sort of it's beyond a genre, but anybody who's interested in topical writing, of whatever genre, Yeah, it just
there is a lot more people out there than you think, and
there
are. But that's part of what I want to do. There are great collections around, they're normally based in kind of niche areas like, folk punk or labor history, or, there's a big labor history and music kind of scholarship collection, that's the people all over the world see that connection, the connection between labor and music. And, it's not just the Wobblies, but everybody, right, sees that. And so it's all there, but it's all scattered and it's all very kind of niche. And that's part of what I like to do. And I do write. I haven't for a long time, but I'm going to get back to that. And I write a lot about this kind of the connections between music and history. And, there's I came across a folk punk band yesterday, and they've done an entire concept album about the life of Leon Trotsky.
Wow,
I have no idea what it's like. They're a great band. They're like this kind of jazzy ska punk kind of outfit called Catch-22. But I'm like, who does that?
Yeah, nobody that I know of. That's great.
But there's so much of that sort of stuff around that people don't, there's Alistair Hewlett's Red Clydeside and all of those. And then I recently found a band in Tasmania, and all of their songs are about Tasmanian convict history, like and working class history and stuff. That's what they write. They write songs about Tasmanian people's history. That's what they do.
Fantastic.
And they're called the Dead Maggies, right? And they're fabulous. And it's like they call themselves punk grass, and they're just fantastic. So
Linda Allen, that's somebody from Washington State, great songwriter who did an entire album on Washington State history. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Fantastic Negrito did this album called The Last Days of Oakland, and that's it's a very personal concept album about the history of Oakland, and that's where he grew up and all that sort of stuff. So, and he's like a, Grammy award-winning artist. Frank Turner did an album recently about notable English women, radical women that you've never heard of, right?
Cool.
And it was a whole project. He's put that album together, So a lot of it is that, it's there. And the Song News Network is a way to access all of that, because I try to make sure that we have links to things, and the website will connect up to databases that I found, and there's always detail in every entry and every song, so you've got a place to start if you want to go into the background of something, like, I don't know, the Limerick Soviet, for example. Alan Parry's written a song about the Limerick Soviet, and that's going to take you places. It's got information in it,
Yeah,
the video
excellent.
we've got connected to it, he does a whole introduction about it. So, you can take it a long way. Yeah, and it's a way of everybody learning their own history. This is the history of ordinary people. This is social movements and people standing up for themselves, and strikes and mutinies and riots and sacrifices, and football.
Football too. It figures in there. Yeah. Paula, you are pretty much a specialist on the industrial workers of the world, and that whole sort of period of history, you could say. And I wonder, how did you first discover the IWW? Was it through music, or through history, or through activism, or do you remember? You would have been a kid, because you were raised by radicals and probably sang IWW songs at camp, I imagine, at least a couple of them. No?
I grew up singing wobbly songs at Mayday. Yeah.
Right.
So I would be what someone in the US would call a red diaper baby.
Is there an Australian term?
Red baby
what are they called here? In Australia, they're called what?
They're just called red babies. We just call us that. So, we don't have diapers. We have nappies.
Right.
But yes, I was raised in a Marxist sect, I suppose you would call it. Well, that's what I call it. I probably just upset my father there. Anyway,
he'll be okay, I think.
Yeah. So I grew up going to Mayday every year in Melbourne, which was a very big thing. There's a big brick building that's Melbourne Trades Hall. That's where it always was, and so it's all my love of music, my love of group singing, my love of the Wobblies, all comes from that experience in my childhood, and it's hard to say which one comes first. So if you're raised a communist in Australia, the history of the Wobblies is kind of just background. It's been sort of incorporated, just like it has in the United States. It's been incorporated into the history of the Communist Party in some ways. And so, yeah, we sang. So the first song I ever learned to sing was Solidarity Forever, and some of my favorite stories of Labor history were Wobbly stories, but I only really started thinking about it consciously when in 2011, I went back to do a thesis. Well, I completely failed to complete a PhD thesis at Adelaide Uni. Right?
It only makes you a better wobbly historian. Yeah. It's just adds to your credibility.
Yeah. I'm a very good historian and a very crap academic. That's so. What I was interested in when I went back was like a sort of, well, I didn't know this at the time, but there's a kind of new field of history called transnational labor history.
Oh,
cool. What I was looking for was early in that era, the early 20th century. So sort of between the beginning, like 1900, and the First World War. What I was interested in was expressions of, it seems to me that this idea that this connection between the working class and patriotism comes out of the post World War One era, right?
We lost you for a couple seconds there, Paula. Just before you said that, there was expressions of your
international solidarity. I was looking for international consciousness amongst the working class, and so I started with dock workers because I just, I've grown up in the trade union movement, and the dock workers union, the wharfies union here, has long been a very radical and very internationalist kind of organization. And so I started looking at that sort of stuff. And then I realized that it was the industrial workers of the world, epitomized that kind of internationalism, that international solidarity. So I started looking in that stuff, particularly amongst maritime workers. And so since then I've been obsessed. Yeah.
And maritime workers, radicalism among maritime workers, and I guess it'd be fair to say that goes back basically as far back as maritime workers. Like, I mean, it's always been they've always been sort of at the forefront of radical thought, and haven't they? And it's just like
going right back. Yeah. Going back to the invention of maritime transport,
And it's largely because of their interaction with each other. Do you think it's mainly because of their interaction with each other, or because of their conditions of work, or both?
Well, both. Yeah, definitely both. Yes. I mean, I think you've got an industry of people who the question of solidarity in a lot of ways is life and death. Like if you're working on a dock, and you're loading a ship, you have to be able to trust the people you're working with, because if you don't, you will die. Yeah, it's a very dangerous job. Stan Weir once said he thinks part of the reason that seafarers and seamen are so politically conscious and internationalist is because a ship is kind of like a little microcosm of a state. So you've got the class conflict is very immediate. Yeah.
Right.
And yes, so it's the conditions of the industry, and also, you cannot strike effectively unless you have international cooperation between docks. International scabbery is a really big problem, because if you refuse to unload a ship, the ship just goes to the next dock. So if the workers at the next dock are not supporting a strike, it was very apparent. But it also is, it's part of the culture of the ocean. The workforce has always been internationalist, and so sailors were excluded from states. Sailors were kept on the margins of states. They were always marginalized. So they didn't have a connection to the nation state in the way that somebody who lives and works in the same city might as well. So the consciousness is very different, and that's what I was interested in, because I think in that period of time, the working class in general had a much more transnational consciousness, because people moved around all the time. Like there's, we have this kind of idea that people emigrated, that they moved somewhere and settled somewhere, but all of these industrial workers moved continually all the time. They had to, because they had to go where the work was. So if you were a coal miner or labourer, an agricultural labourer, your entire life was itinerant, internationally itinerant, as well as within borders. And it took I think it actually took a really big effort of the state to inculcate sort of patriotism into the workers, and that happened in the 1920s and stuff. So
incidentally, on this
that's
subject,
how I got into it. Yeah.
On the subject of wobblies of the world, and there's also a book that you contributed to called Wobblies of the World. Who is the publisher on that again?
Okay.
Who published that one? I have it also in my bookshelf, but there it is. Okay.
Yes, it is. I made sure you got a copy.
And who?
That's it. Wobblies of the World, and it's published by Pluto Press.
Pluto Press. Yeah.
Yes, there's a Facebook page you can find all the details there on the Facebook page as well, which has got
Excellent.
it's got this picture in it, so it's easy to find.
Well,
and yes, it's a wonderful book, and I wrote chapter 16, but I'm very proud of it because all of my favorite wobbly historians have written chapters. It's a genuine international collaborative effort.
Yeah, it's good to be
it's a
among
wonderful book,
among
and all the
friends.
chapters
Yeah.
are short. So we all had to keep them really short, and it was a struggle. I can tell you that.
Oh yeah, that's much harder than any other command from an editor. Like 1,000 words. Oh shit.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I've never been able to cope with word limits.
No.
I was the same at uni. I always went over the word limit. I'm
Yeah.
like, I can't write a 1,000-word essay. You can barely get started in 1,000 words.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Well,
yes.
Paula, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me for my live stream.
Worries.
We'll have you back if you can stand it sometime soon.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Excellent. And we've got some conversations coming up in the next few weeks, anyway.
Yeah,
With
we
various
got
people.
more subjects. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes, and there will be more. There will definitely be more. And I would like to talk some more about history and music. That would be a good thing.
Yeah, history and music, and if a couple of weeks from now, there's going to be a whole lot more current events to cover as well. Who knows what? But
yes,
we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Paula. Thank you all out there in the world, whoever you are, including the folks who have been commenting. I just haven't been reading for the past few minutes, but everybody out there on Twitch and Facebook and everywhere, thanks for joining me for this discussion with Paula De Angelis in Adelaide, Australia. If you want to share this broadcast with anyone, you'll find it shortly up on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/drovics in the Discussions with David playlist. It will also soon be up in audio podcast form as an MP3 for free download on all the usual podcasting platforms if you search for This Week with David Rovics. You can also get my podcasts on the David Rovics mobile app and at davidrovics.com. Tomorrow's show will be back at the usual time at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. GMT. I'll be talking with another friend and fellow radical immigration lawyer and human rights activist from Montreal, Quebec, Walter Tom. Hope to see you guys here in the Matrix and sometime soon back in the streets. Don't pay the rent.